You've laid awake at night wondering if you're not cut out for trauma work, right? You've told yourself that you absorb too much or you need thicker skin. Listen to me, please come here. You do not have to be a gladiator to be a trauma therapist for the long term. What you need is a workplace built to sustain you, because you cannot individually fix what was never designed for you in the first place. And I know how frustrating this all is, because you've done all the things that you're supposed to do, right? You see your own therapist, you set the boundaries, you download the apps, you take the walks, you do the breath work. Oh, I'm out of breath just listing that. And you still feel depleted. But it's not your fault. It's actually a sign that the system around you isn't carrying its weight. So today, I want to talk about what it actually looks like when an organization is built to sustain trauma therapists. Not so you feel worse about where you work, but so you can name what's missing. And honestly, so you can forward this video to someone who might actually be able to do something about it. And real quick, if you don't know me yet, hi, I'm Jenny Hughes, trauma psychologist and founder of the Brave Trauma Therapist Collective, which is where we make sure trauma therapists have something left for themselves at the end of each day. And before we get into all of this, I want to hear from you real quick. Drop a number in the comments and tell me, 1, does your workplace actively support your resilience? Or 2, is it mostly on you to figure it out? And if you are a clinical director or supervisor watching this thinking, I want to build this kind of culture, but I don't know where to start, stick around to the end, because I'm going to tell you exactly how I help organizations do this work all the time. So, what does it actually look like when a workplace is built to sustain trauma therapists? Not in some ideal fantasy world, but in real practices, agencies, and organizations that exist right now. I'm going to walk you through 8 things that set sustainable teams apart. Some of these are supervision practices, some are team rituals, some are structural decisions that leadership makes. And all of them are things that can actually be implemented, okay? Which is why I want you to send this video to whoever needs to see it. Your supervisor, your clinical director, your practice owner, whoever has the power to change how things work where you are, because this is possible. So let's get into it. The first way is to give vicarious resilience a name out loud. Most teams only talk about the hard stuff and only when things are going wrong, right? The burnout, vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, secondary traumatic stress. We got lots of language for when we're struggling, but vicarious resilience, the moments when the work actually fills you back up, those often or usually even go unspoken. And part of that's because most people have never even heard the term. So if that's you, I've got a whole video breaking down what vicarious resilience actually is. I'll link it in the description, and I'm going to pin it up here so you can watch. And here's the short version. Vicarious resilience is the way that witnessing your client's healing, their courage, their growth can and actually does change you as a trauma therapist for the better. It's the reason that there are therapists who stay in this field for decades and still feel connected to the reason why they started. This thing is real, it's documented, and we were just never taught to look for it. So here's what sustainable teams do differently. Leadership and supervisors name it out loud. They say the words. Wow, that sounds like it was a moment of vicarious resilience. Or what filled you up this week? They make it just part of the vocabulary and shared language instead of something that individuals hope they stumble upon in their own work. You name it, leader, it becomes real. When you name it, trauma therapist, it becomes something you can track, something you can cultivate, something that's part of the culture instead of an accident. So naming it's the first step, but where does that naming actually happen? That brings us to number 2, supervision that asks about the therapist, not just the case. Let's be honest about what most supervision or consultation looks like, okay? You sit down with your supervisor, your colleague, and you talk about your clients, right? Treatment plan, stuck points, documentation that still needs to be finished. Maybe you staff a really tough case or you troubleshoot someone who's in crisis, and then you move on. That kind of supervision is necessary. It's a thing, but it's not sufficient because it's only about the client. The therapist in the room, the one holding all of it, barely even gets a mention. Sustainable supervision asks different questions. How are you holding this case? What did that session leave you with? How are you noticing this work living in your body this week? It protects time for the human in the room, not just the case on the screen. And I know what you might be thinking. My supervision or consultation is already packed. There is no time for that. But centering the therapist within the meeting doesn't have to be an hour-long processing session. It can be 5 minutes at the start, a genuine check-in that isn't performative, a supervisor who actually pauses and waits for a real answer when they ask how you're doing. The teams that last have supervisors who treat the therapist's internal experience as part of the clinical work, not separate from it. And as wonderful and necessary as supervision is, vicarious resilience can't live in just one meeting a week. It has to show up in more places than that, right? And that's how we get to this third way that we can build vicarious resilience right into our team cultures, which is through team rituals that make space for the human. Can you see the connection here? This one isn't about adding more meetings. Please, nobody needs more meetings. We may have already covered that indirectly in the last one. Instead, it's about what happens in the spaces you already have. So think about the moments that exist in your workday, even just the few minutes before case consultation starts. The transition between the morning and afternoon, the end of a particularly heavy day, the water cooler moments. What happens in those moments right now? It's maybe nothing intentional, okay? People sitting around checking their phones, joining the Zoom call literally at the time of the meeting starting, answering emails, jumping straight into the next thing, right? Sustainable teams build small rituals into those moments so that people join the Zoom meeting early because they are excited for the 2-minute check-in at the start of consultation. That's not just about cases. Those moments where they get asked and someone actually wants to hear, how are you arriving today? Or a brief debrief after heavy days where people can name what they're carrying before they walk out the door. A shared transition practice between clients, even if it's just 30 seconds of breath with someone else. These are not elaborate wellness programs. They are small, repeatable moments that communicate something really important. We see you as a person here, not just a number, not just a clinician, not a productivity unit, a human being doing hard work alongside other human beings. These repeatable moments, these rituals, create an important rhythm for teams. But someone has to set the tone for those rituals to feel safe, which brings us to number 4, leaders who go first. If leadership never talks about their own experience with the weight of this work, staff are not going to. It's that simple. Therapists are watching. They're watching to see if it's actually safe to be honest. And when supervisors and directors present as endlessly resilient, never affected, always holding it together, that sends a message. And the message is this: struggle is not welcome here. Keep it to yourself, okay? Now, modeling as a leader isn't about oversharing. You don't need to process your trauma at a staff meeting, but there's a huge difference between oversharing and normalizing. A therapist who says, that case stuck with me too, changes what's possible for the whole team. A director who shares, this has been a really tough month for me, gives everyone else permission to stop pretending like their lives are perfect. Permission travels top down in organizations. So when leaders go first, when they show that being affected by this work is normal and expected, not shameful, everyone else can take a breath. So when leaders model it, it opens the door, right? And then it's on the culture to keep that door open or slam it shut, which is number 5. Normalize the weight without pathologizing it. Here's what I mean. There's a big difference between a culture that says, this work is heavy and we talk about it, and a culture that says, this work is heavy and if you're struggling, something must be wrong with you. It must be your fault. Just think about how those two things landed in your body, okay? And that first one, the let's talk about it one, that keeps the door open. The second one, the it's your fault one, that slams that shit shut and makes sure nobody tries to open it ever again. Okay. This connects to something I talk about a lot, that vicarious trauma is not a diagnosis. It's an occupational reality, and that's not a bad thing. It's just what happens when you do your job well, when you actually attune to people who are suffering. It becomes a problem when organizations treat it like an individual weakness, like something you should be able to prevent if you just had better self-care or stronger boundaries. This distinction lives in how people talk. It lives in how policies are written. It lives in how check-ins are framed. Are you burned out feels very different from how's this work showing up for you and affecting you right now? One implies you failed. The other communicates and acknowledges that you're human. One slams that door shut. The other holds it wide open. Okay, thank you for visiting my TED Talk. Now, when we are naming vicarious resilience and then normalizing vicarious trauma, they can become culture shifts, right? But culture also needs structure to hold it up, which is number 6, structural pauses that are actually protected. Now, I'm not talking about make sure you take your PTO. I'm talking about real rhythm that gets built into the actual workday. So what does this look like? It might look like gaps between back-to-back sessions, even if just 15 minutes, so that you're not jumping from one trauma narrative directly into another with zero transition. Or a culture of protected lunch breaks, maybe even where everyone eats lunch together for family lunch that are actually for eating and resting and not charting and getting caught up on stuff. This cultural structure can look like mental health days that don't require you to justify yourself or prove that you're sick enough. All of these are structural. They require someone with decision-making power to look at how schedules are built, how productivity is measured, and ask, are we setting people up to succeed, or are we setting them up to burn out? The organizations that sustain trauma therapists treat rest as infrastructure, not reward. It's not something that you earn after you're depleted. Instead, it's built into how the work is designed from the start. So the structure of an organization protects individuals, and resilience lives in the space between the people of the organization, which is number 7. Peer support that's built in, not luck. Some therapists are so lucky they happen to find a colleague that they click with, someone they can process with, someone who gets it. And that relationship becomes a lifeline, let me tell you. But so many others stay isolated for years in an office full of people, and they still feel so completely alone. They don't have anyone they can really talk to about what this work is like. And that isolation makes everything harder, which was a primary reason I started the Brave Trauma Therapist Collective in the first place. And now I get to translate our work in Brave to organizations. And one of the very first things we work on is building in peer support, because sustainable organizations don't leave peer support up to chance. They live and breathe it through things like peer consultation, maybe in pairs, or informal buddy systems, and intentional matching when someone new joins the team. These are structures that communicate you're not supposed to carry this alone, and we're going to make sure that you don't have to. This doesn't mean forced friendships, okay? There's so much nuance in how these systems are structured and created and actually lived. And it does mean creating conditions where connection is likely, where people have time and space to actually know each other, and where isolation isn't the default. Okay, I'm willing to bet that all of this sounds great, right? I'm pretty sure we can agree that all of this matters. But here's a question that comes up all the time. How do you know if it's actually working? And that's number 8, our final one in this video. Measure what matters. Productivity metrics will not tell you if your team is sustainable. You can have a team hitting all their numbers and still be 6 months away from a mass exodus. The numbers don't capture what's actually happening underneath the surface. But you know what does? Tracking things like compassion satisfaction, psychological safety, whether staff actually feel supported, whether they'd recommend this workplace to a friend, whether they're experiencing more vicarious resilience or more vicarious trauma over time, Organizations that sustain trauma therapists don't just hope the culture is working, they actually check. And this doesn't have to be complicated. I have 2 free tools, a Vicarious Trauma Tracker and a Vicarious Resilience Tracker, that I originally created for individual therapists to use on their own, but I've seen and worked with teams who use them in really powerful ways, like as a weekly prompt during supervision or team meetings, or as a conversation starter in group consultation. Ultimately, as a shared language to name what's happening across the team. And these resources are simple and free. They're linked in the description, and they're a really great place to start if you want to bring some measurement into your team culture without building something from scratch. One thing I see over and over again in my work with organizations and groups is that most clinical leaders want this kind of culture. The supervisors and directors are trying to hold their teams together. They're not the enemy. They're often just as exhausted, just as under-resourced, just as unsupported as everyone else. They may have just never gotten the training on how to do this stuff. Because we teach therapists how to hold trauma. We train them in modalities and interventions and, treatment planning, all the things. But we don't really teach teams how to hold each other. We just assume that it'll happen because we're all therapists. We don't teach supervisors how to build sustainable cultures or teach organizations how to actually support the people doing this work. That's the gap. So if you're watching this as a therapist and you're thinking, damn, I wish my workplace did even half of this, I want you to do something. Send them this video. Seriously, I mean it. Screenshot it, forward it, share it with whoever needs to see it. Sometimes the most powerful thing that you can do is name what's possible. So give your leadership a vision for what this could look like. And if you're watching this as a clinical director, supervisor, or practice owner, and you're thinking, man, I really want this, but I don't know how to build it. That's exactly what the Brave Method training is. It's a framework that I bring into organizations to create exactly what we talked about today. Shared language around vicarious resilience, supervision and consultation practices that actually sustain people, a culture that doesn't leave resilience up to individual willpower. There's a link in the description below to book a call with me so we can talk about if it's the right fit for your organization. No pressure, no pitch, just a conversation about what you are noticing in your space and how this could help. So whether you're forwarding this video to your supervisor or bookmarking it for later or just sitting with it, I want you to know something. You were never supposed to do this work alone. And the fact that you're still here, still caring, still looking for better answers, that's not a sign that you're too soft for this field. That's a sign that you're exactly who this field needs. So take care of yourself, and I can't wait to catch you in the next video.